what drew me to the era that's in City on Fire was really the music initially. Um, the substrate of the book, going back to when I was a little kid, my dad sending off his boxes of pages to New York to get books made out of them. And I'm reading like, Stuart Little and Harriet the Spy and From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basley Frankweiler, New York as a setting. Like I already had this romance of New York, and I had this romance of cities more generally because I was from the rural South, and it was very homogenous and very kind of conservative and very not good for me. Um, but it by the time I was in my teens, it was like the music. I had this kind of just love for punk music. And while my scene was the DC scene, like I was also listening, historically to like the Ramones and Patti Smith and Talking Heads and television. Um, and I was reading poetry by Ted Berrigan and by John Ashbery and by John Ashbery's a little bit older, but who would have been plausibly, I can imagine Ted Berrigan in the back of CBGB's at a Ramones show, Um, and the catalyst, the thing that turned that background into the novel was September 11th. It was just like, here's this moment of this city torn open. And at the same time, after September 11th, I had all these friends who'd made the jump to New York who, on that day, you couldn't get a cell signal out. We were evacuated from a building in DC. I'm trying to like reach my friends in New York. Like, it was a crazy day. And I started going up to see them and to just kind of bear witness to what was going on. And I felt like there was this strange energy for months afterward. In a lot of places, but particularly at night, particularly in the bars at night, and a way that people were trying to connect. And I thought that just made me think of that mid 70s period where, in the midst of destruction, there's this urge for connection and creation. And I just kind of thought that maybe talking about one would be a way of talking about the other, or that I could capture something about what I was seeing by going back in time, almost like science fiction. The way that science fiction is a comment on, fact. This story is an idea that I had. I got it at the Tenleytown 7-Eleven in Washington, D.C. in the fall of 1997. So the idea actually predates City on Fire. And the idea, simply put, was about a young father who's a recovering addict who feels that he has to like essentially kidnap his daughter, to violate the custody agreement and take her away with him. Not forever, but for a defined period of time. I tried to write it in the early aughts. I didn't have kids at the time, maybe that was an element of not being able to pull it off, but it just wasn't working. And I just knew, I was like, I'm not going to figure this out intellectually. I got to put this aside and come back to it. So I circled back to it after City on Fire. And by that point, the child character, instead of being, excuse me, she was very young in the original version. And then for whatever reason, I later like did this version where it just kind of turned into a boy for a while. But when I came back to it, she was a 13-year-old girl about to turn 14. And she was, I was watching her secretly drinking, being kind of like half torched at school, which is an experience I knew from the inside. And it just cast this light on the father's motivations, that he would be kind of watching, he would get wind of her headed toward the same very rough seas that had kind of wrecked his life, including blowing up his family, that is to say, addiction, and would feel like, hey, like I'm the only person who gets how serious this is. I've got to like swoop back in and save her. And then at 14, the kid would be like, hell no, like get out of my life, estranged junkie man. Like, I do not need your help. And the tension there just seems, that was the story. Initially, you know, once I finally got off book tour for City on Fire, initially I had like a really good 3, 4, 5 months where it just poured. And then it was like 2 to 3 years of trying to get the world back out of my study so I could figure out the rest. The most enchanting parts of, as far as I can tell, of writing a novel, are the beginning, the part where it's just you're in the zone and it's something's coming through you and you're like, I don't even know where this is coming from, but this is definitely a book. And then the end. I tend to like, when I start a book, I tend to like have the beginning, and then I tend to have the start of act 3, of the like final act of the book, or something from the start of act 3. So I have something to kind of aim for roughly, but it's really important for me that I don't know how the book ends or gets to the end. And so into that, in that last kind of act, you know, where I've gone past what I was aiming for and I'm in uncharted territory, but there's all of this momentum because so many choices, so many switches have been thrown behind you. You know, the possibilities are narrowing to steer you toward wherever you're going to go. That's just magic. And for me, you know, the last like 100 pages of this book are like, I don't know if I'll ever get there again. Like, it was just one of the great writing experiences of my life. And I still just like, and it was such a joy to write.